What is up, my friends? Welcome to my studio. I don't know if you've ever had a look around. I've been shooting in this corner a lot, but I got a lot of cool things around here. Those are some Bruce Lee things, and there's a lot of cool stuff. I'll show you a different spot next time we do a live. I'm not sure when that is going to be. This is what we do. It's live stream Thursdays. If you're watching this after, we didn't do this on a Thursday. We did this on a Tuesday. But that's, what it is when you got your own thing. Just do whatever you want, right? I encourage people to start your own platforms and YouTubes and stuff, talking about whatever you're experts in or passionate about or crazy about or whatever, because it's the funnest thing ever. Like I said, I do live stream Thursdays, but, today, at the time of recording this, if you're watching it later, thank you. Could be 2028. Could be post-apocalyptic shit happening right now. But we did not do this on a Thursday. We did it on a Tuesday. But I can do whatever I want. And I tell people to start their own stuff because there's something incredibly liberating about it. Now, as you change, the more you kind of get to do your own thing, the more you'll change. That was an unexpected, beautiful thing about, the big change for me as a guy who's a creator was, I think around 2017, I had a 24-hour TV job. And then one day there was no more 24-hour TV job. They just got rid of the entire creating department. So that's going on, 7-8 years now. You hope that you'll build a business that you can do yourself and have fun and be creative. What I didn't realize is how much doing your own thing and constantly creating your own way will change you. Not just change the things you make, but change you. You become a different person when you get to express your own ideas and think outside of paradigm. So I get to do whatever I want, as does anybody who has their own YouTube channel. I take it a little further in my mind, at least, because on the 800,000 followers and subscribers I got on TikTok and Instagram and those places end up giving me a real good business. And I got a business commentating and analyzing fights all over. So my YouTube channel is just where I get to really kind of riff on new thoughts and new ideas that will eventually make their way into karate combat, into broadcasts that I do, into my pieces that I make every day for TikTok and Instagram and X. Who does anyone call it that? But this is what we do fundamentally. Is my obsession since I was a little kid: martial arts, studying martial arts, learning about martial arts, understanding it. I was a gymnast first. I was kind of think of that as my first martial art. My daughter is 2.5. She starts her second window of gymnastics this Saturday. Thursday, Friday, I'm in Toronto, and I'm being a fight coordinator on some top secret project, which is really fun. You get to move athletes and actors around and kind of create the fight choreography, fight coordinating. It's really fun. So Thursday, Friday, I do that. Friday night, I'm going to zip back home so that Saturday morning I can drive my daughter. And this is the last window where parents can be in the room playing with them during gymnastics. It's the greatest thing. So I'm going to go do that. And then I'm going to go back to the airport another couple hours to get on a plane and fly to Singapore. I leave on a Saturday and I arrive in Singapore on a Monday morning. There's time change in there, but it's intimidating. But it's karate combat next week, Wednesday in Singapore. So I'll do a bunch of stuff on my Instagram and on my other socials from Singapore while I'm there. Which can be really fun. I love doing karate combat. It's super cool. So we talk about martial arts. I made a few things here, just 5 minutes thinking out loud before. I've got a bunch of weird fight breakdowns. This one's not so weird, but speaking of karate combat, that was one people asked me. Here's a couple other quickly, and then let me chat about it. Jon Jones versus 2 Demetrius Johnsons. I like it. That's a good one. 2 Demetrius Johnsons at 135. That's what I fought at. At 135, that's 270, which is, above the heavyweight limit. But, Demetrius Johnson weighed under 150. So he's closer to 2 Demetrius Johnson is closer to 300 pounds. Heavyweight Jon Jones, what's he, 250 or 240? I don't know. So there's more dude, with two Demetrius Johnsons. We'll get into that one. We'll talk about this, karate combat. George and Steven are good friends and friends of each other. And they're super cool in karate combat. Our friend Mike Perry versus Kimbo Slice. Kimbo Slice is I will be fight coordinating people related to the Kimbo Slice story. That's not what I'm working on, but I'll be doing that on Wednesday or Thursday, this Thursday. This is an interesting one people sent me. Speaking of, I'm really into this. I'm super into this bare knuckle league called BYB. I'll probably make some stuff around that in the coming weeks. They bought BKB, which is a show I worked on since 2017. I'll tell you a quick story. 2017, I was alluding to it earlier, was kind of a big point where I went from, I'm a guy who talks about fighting on TV in a suit, to I'm going to create on my own platforms and my own business where I just have partnerships and create anything I want. Don't have bosses, especially creative bosses, creative partnerships. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So 2017, that kind of happens. And I'm like, okay, well, I have a fundamental one. I'll tell you all about kind of the structure of my business on another one. We'll do a special one with the idea of teaching you guys some of the ways to be able to make some version of your own business, because it actually all started to make sense a few years ago. And now it works so well. It's a beautiful time to do your own business. But so I had no real jobs or income, which was kind of spooky for a minute. And I was reaching out to things I was really interested in. Also, I've got a pretty good history of when I think something's really cool, but it's not yet popular. There's a certain kind of thing that I like that I can usually tell, okay, in 1 year, 2 year, 3 or 5 years, this is going to be a pretty standard thing. I have a very good history of that in my life. And it's sort of a part of the way that I sort of consume things and think about art and my sort of, it's just a aspect of how I see things. Not always good, because often I've started things way too early. Actually, we're talking about breakdowns today. Started doing fight breakdowns 2012. So back then people didn't care about any of that kind of stuff. This is what I do. I meander and I go all over the place. But Mike Perry versus Kimbo in bare knuckle made me think of the show I love, BYB, which has bought BKB, which I've been working for since 2017. So 2017, the 24-hour fighting channel that I worked at suddenly cancels the creation of content, which of course in retrospect seems suspect, but that's their business, not mine. So I needed work. I was working at TSN, which was very fortunate that I was, doing a few days a month at TSN. So that was, I could eat. But I started reaching out to things I was really passionate about. And one of them was BKB, because it was this bare knuckle show that had started in hay bales. It was called You Be Bad, UBBAD, You Be Bad. And I loved it. And I reached out to them and I was like, I really think I could add something. I have a different perspective and I look at martial arts in a different way. And I see bare knuckle boxing in 2017 as this sort of very complex and beautiful thing. And it's probably, as it's starting to be shared and consumed, people probably will talk a lot about how dramatic and violent and bloody and stuff it is, and sensational, but they may not talk about this. I could contribute this. And Jim, who was one of the owners of BKB, bare knuckle boxing, in what's going on here? My phone is yelling at me. Why are you yelling at me? It's weird. It always starts the YouTube like on my phone. Weird. So I hear myself. Freaky. No, we don't need to me. That's not right. So Jim at BKB was like, yeah, mate, we'd love to. And this is through WhatsApp. He's like, yeah, we'd love to have you, mate. But we can't afford you. And I wrote back, you get me a plane ticket, you give me a bed and some money for food, and I'll do it. And he wrote back, welcome aboard, mate. And then I was flying, 2 flights with a layover to Liverpool. Got there, my baggage didn't come because it was a weird connecting flight. Sometimes when there's different, you're getting the cheapest flight you can. They were an upstart company. That was they're a big company. BYB is very big bare knuckle show. I'm going to talk a lot more about them in the coming weeks and months because I really dig it. I really dig. I dig the vibe. They've got a triangle ring. It's called a trigon. And there's a lot of fascinating elements of that. So I'm going to talk about it a lot. But yeah, so suddenly I'm in Liverpool. I got no luggage. I'm sleeping on a fold-out couch. Mike Richmond was fighting in the co-main event, and let me bang, bro. Julian Lane was fighting, rematching Jimmy Sweeney in the main event. I got the clothes on my back, and my luggage arrived like an hour before we went to the venue. It all worked out beautifully. And then from that day forward, I started working for BKB 7 years ago. Then later they paid me, and then they paid me more. And as they grew, they were able to, bring me on it was a real job. I will tell you, by the way, we're talking about weird fight matchups today. I will tell you that most of the time, when you really are starting out in anything, and I wasn't starting out by this point, I've been doing it for a long time, but when you are starting out, you're really crazy about something, that tendency, if somebody says, can you make a couple of pieces for me, or you're an editor, or you're a gardener, and somebody says, I got a big company, you want to do a small piece of gardening, you say, what? I'll do it for free one time, of course. Let me show what I can do. But a lot of people take advantage of that. And in a long run, when you are successful later, you usually shouldn't do it anymore, because you'll end up finding yourself being paid a fraction of what you're actually worth. But this was one of those exceptions to that, because these were really wonderful people. And when they grew, I got paid more. And, over 6 or 7 years, eventually you're back up to, getting into the realm of what you actually are worth. And you love it, and you're along for the ride. You're part of the family, and that happens. Just never count on it happening, because you don't want to be disappointed because you projected you deserved something. Right? If you say I'm doing it for free, do it for free, and don't expect it to all work out. Anyways, fun story. What triggered that story was Mike Perry versus Kimbo Slice in bare knuckle. So we're going to talk about some of these. But first off, yes, we're talking about martial arts here on this channel, and I really always like to use martial arts as a learning tool to figure out things. So something, like how to slip and counter. There are aspects to business that one can draw from that. How to train your body to overcome something, lessons for life about that, right? How to find yourself in a position that you don't like, but is actually not as bad as you thought it was, because you've been in that position many times and you're comfortable with it, you're prepared for it. There's lessons, metaphor all over. When you can't breathe and you can't see, but you've summoned up enough energy to finish a round. Once you finish the round, they could put a little ice on your neck, and you suddenly realize, hey, I can continue. All it took was that little bit of work to be able to go longer. Metaphor, right? All of this. Every lesson there is in martial arts can be extracted and applied to being a neighbor or father or a business person or, a student or anything, right? So I love that. My title today was Weird Fight Breakdowns, and I had Jon Jones and a T-Rex, and I put that on there because actually I did that one in a YouTube that I just did a day or two ago that's being edited, that will come out in the coming weeks. I started, I want to tell you why I'm kind of into weird ones or whatever now. And part of it is like in the process of doing anything for a long time, there's many different lessons one can learn. So I started to really analyze and dissect and create a sort of some type of discussion or conversation or examination of fights around that time. And there really wasn't a thing. If you've been watching fights for 8 years or 9 years, you'll be like, oh, just give me a fight breakdown. That term didn't even exist in 2012. There was a few people that actually really kind of in that era. You go back boxing, there's always been people, right? You go back wrestling, college wrestling, there's nerds like me in every type of martial art. But in the modern era, and especially mixed martial arts, which was very much the popular, it is still, obviously the UFC is massive and PFL and ONE are very large companies. But this universal idea that MMA was like the only thing, 2012 to 2020. Now the mainstream thinks that, but people who are really into martial arts kind of start. This is the era of connoisseur consumption for big martial arts people. We're gonna watch Sean O'Malley fight on Saturday because that's big and we want to see it. But what we're going to talk about with all our friends are going to be Karate Combat or BYB, Game Bred bare knuckle, Jorge show, all lots, right? Lots of things like that. Those are what the nerds are into now. It's hard to be into the most popular, most mainstream, most packaged, most repetitive thing. You still watch it, but it's not what people are talking about on Discord or whatever, wherever. That's probably a really old reference, and I'm really old, but I'm still a nerd. And I'm still somebody who's always going to like something a little newer and a little off the beaten track. It's who I've been. And that can change. We can always change. We can become different people. But that's who I've been most of my life, as I kind of get bored of the status quo. And it's been it produced a lot of joy in my life, so anyway, so I want to talk about, in the process of kind of developing this, there was a guy named Jack Slack at the time who's still around, analyzing, I think, boxing a lot, fighting a lot. I think he's soured and tired of it a little bit. I don't know that for sure, because I don't get to consume a lot of other people's stuff. Just the nature of constantly making. Also, I found I made better things that seemed to have my audience grew, and as they grew, they preferred the stuff better when I didn't consume what other people were doing. Like, it's when I say there's a lot of joy to me kind of being outside the status quo, it's not only that for me as what I enjoy, but it's made me a better creator and a better artist. I innovate more, and I just go further and further down into my own thing, which is really what I've learned I want to encourage my daughter to do, and I would encourage everybody to do. But so that's kind of what I'm getting to here in my setup for my Weird Fight Breakdowns. Is 2012 didn't really exist. There was a guy named Jack Slack who's still doing some amount of it today. I'm not sure how much. It could be massive in his sphere. There was somebody called BJJ Scout, and I'm pretty sure they started analyzing and talking about jiu-jitsu videos, but then they also talked about fighting people. Jiu-jitsu is a style of combat. Whether or not it's fighting, let me write that down. That's going to be a topic for conversation today. Is as soon in the future is BJJ quote fighting, because that's actually a really fun conversation I've seen people talk about. That'll be in another live, because I do lives on Thursdays. And if you're watching this now, you're like, why does this idiot just keep saying that? It's because today is actually a Tuesday. But so in the process of doing this, later, and then right around the same time I was going, my friend Lawrence Kenshin, who we became really good friends, and we get along really well. I love him. We're very different people, which many of your best friends are like that. But we share this obsessive love of martial arts, and about looking at it and kind of obsessing over it, right? And so we get along very well. And then John Gooden and Dan Hardy, shortly after, they started, so there started to be this little world of people doing it in the last number of years. And then it kind of became a root thing. I made thousands of these things. This will happen, and then he did this, and then this took place. Once he did that, he used this energy to, and so after the fact, I still do enjoy to do that. I've learned to draw less conclusions for many of the reasons I'm going to explain sort of go here. But then I also kind of got away from, these abstract ones. Also, the more, the less I worked or the less I consumed of the very mainstream, the more labored it felt to go when somebody said, well, what's going to happen between Ilia Topuria and whomever? And I'd be like, shit, I'm not consuming a lot of Ilia Topuria. I realize this is a really great martial artist, and when he fights, I'll watch it. Then suddenly there'll be some moments that this great martial artist does, but I'm just not consuming where he's from and what he did and what happened with this thing. It started to, a lot of that seemed flawed to me. And I'll tell you why. And this applies to everything, right? When we're looking at our ability to assess something. At the time of this streaming, I live in Canada. At the time of this streaming, I think there was today or tonight or tomorrow night, in the next little bit, there's a debate, the president of the United States, the potential president of the United States. So a lot of people will go and say, this person could do this, and then this one will do this, but if this one does this, this will happen. And that's kind of where the idea of the sort of breaking down of fights started to become this repetitive kind of formulaic, ritualistic thing. And that's the very thing I was trying to get away from when, I'm just looking at it as an individual, what I was thinking and learning. Maybe this apply to some of you guys too, but I was trying to get away from just, what's the best matchup for this? What's the route? Is this guy going to be fight for the title? Is this guy a title contender? Is this woman the greatest of all time? And it's just all the same. It was just the same things over and over. And that always first, somehow in things that I love, it seems to make me really uncomfortable for months or some length of time. Sometimes it even causes like a real weird emotional reaction in me. Something about being stagnant in learning and exploring things really kind of makes me uncomfortable. And then usually it causes me to innovate or change, not always in the most successful ways either. Sometimes very experimental ways, trying many different things until I find something I'm really excited about. This is my artistic process. Everybody's different. But so something about that as it, what do you think about this matchup? Well, this guy's got to use his wrestling to this, but if this guy can just apply a lot of pressure, overwhelm him with this kind of thing, but this guy's got to use distance management, but he's really good at this. And suddenly I was just like, wait a second, this actually isn't what the deeper I went into it, there were flaws to it. So I was like, why am I why did I spend a couple of years now looking at it different? It was because I wanted to figure out where were the actual flaws and limitations in how we'd examine fighting. I'm doing that to see how that we could have flaws and limitations in the way we would examine football or a political debate or, which job we should take or how to find the right parking spot or anything. It's life, right? So here's some of the limitations that happen when somebody says, what's going to happen between this fighter and this fighter? When we're trying to discern something, we're trying to tell, the best, most truthful story we possibly can about a scenario. There are many limitations. And one of them begins with the limitations of our senses. If I watch a fight, and especially if we're going to argue about it, which is a lot why these things happen, is as a tool to create engagement. Why would somebody make fight breakdowns or predictions or whatever? Well, from the business standpoint, from the root purpose, we may do it because it's fun, but the world exists. This type of paradigm exists because it creates engagement, which will sell a pay-per-view at the end of the day, right? So, and it also gets people arguing. Why did you think this guy was going to win? Clearly, this guy's going to win, right? You can get people to argue. And from a media business standpoint, getting you to argue with your neighbor, with people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, it's really good for business. It's very good for business. Jake Paul understands this. He didn't choose Mike Tyson only because it's a dramatic fight that he has many advantages in because the man's older and, all that. He also chose it because it'll upset a lot of people and those people will react and that will sell attention and engagement and tickets, right? But because of all that, there are some of these limitations. So you and I will decide we want to argue about a football game or a fight. We have limitations of our senses. What we see is not the same. My ability and a coach and a fighter and somebody who just watches billions of fights will see these things differently than somebody who reacts to big dramatic moments and knockouts, right? Or somebody who watched 1,000 fights will see fights different than somebody who watched 100,000 fights, right? The literal thing that is coming into our eyes and then processed into our brain that we're attempting to assess, that ability to assess it goes through the limitations of our senses, right? Then, even if we see the same thing, this thing happens and this guy does this, there's limitations of our knowledge, right? Do you know what that actually means? And where did that knowledge come from? If your knowledge about, I don't even want to say their names because people get upset, but the woman and the gentleman who are both going to debate, and by the time you're watching this, that could have happened 7 years ago. But it'll happen again in the future many times. Two political people debate on TV, or two people fight in a cage, or whatever the scenario is. What is our actual knowledge and where did it come from? And how confident are we in it? And the biggest problem is usually we're too confident in it, right? What I think I know about political candidate A and political candidate B has been given to me through all types of different interfaces, the internet and news and whatever, that is colored for many purposes other than to give me the most knowledge. And when we're back to talking about fighting, that's what we do. The knowledge that we have about, so I'll use a very an example here showing the limitations of our senses and the limitations of our knowledge. I have a very good friend, and he runs MMA Uncensored on Instagram. And sometimes we do collab. Quite often we do collab posts. I'll make one, and I'll just share with him. He makes one, and I'll share. I tend to share things, and we know when to ask each other now. I tend to share things. I don't do a lot of like dramatic. This guy said this about this or whatever, but I'll share things that just have to do with fighting. So there was one the other day. So who's the best boxer in MMA? Now, 500 people said, and there was either mostly, half of them were like Ilya Topuria, and then 60% of them, I know half and 60 make more, but you know what I mean, were Max Holloway. Now, most of the reason that those people would say that, their senses actually are not trained to make that assessment. The assessment of somebody's skill as a boxer, or the assessment of any specialized skill, is in and of itself a specialized skill. So what I'm saying is, I am not qualified specifically to assess this political debate or football, right? I do not have the knowledge, the experience. I don't have any of these things. My senses are not trained to even know what I'm seeing. And the knowledge, when people say, well, this guy's the best boxer and this guy, what you'll often hear is reference to people who have themselves claimed to be the best boxer, or many analysts or television commentators have said are the best boxer. So the knowledge, what we're thinking of as knowledge, has been sort of assigned to us, right? And that's not a bad thing. This is just life, right? And then these are useful things to look at. And I'm looking at these in myself like, oh, okay, over time, there are what I've learned, improved my ability to see and interpret what I see so much over the years that it's just enough to let me see how little I can see and what could be possible with better senses and better processing. I've learned enough knowledge to know there's so much more knowledge that I could know. And so in the context of that, I don't know very much. And then there's the limitations of your experience. That's one of the biggest ones. In fighting, and this would be probably true in football and politics and business and retail and everything, in fighting, like, I have to invent this number because there's no specific math here, but somewhere in the maybe 90%, maybe 95% of the information about fighting is only available within the experience, right? Right? Within the experience. If you don't have the experience of seeing, feeling, experiencing what is happening when somebody is fighting with you at whatever level you can experience that, you're actually seeing, your eyes see it, and your brain is processing things other people have said about it that you haven't connected to an actual feeling or experience around. Doesn't mean you can't talk about it. We can all talk about anything. But if we're too confident in what we think happens when somebody is trying to, survive a rear naked choke, or, in business or news or whatever, right? Most of that, we have almost no actual experience. We have experience hearing it, and that experience hearing it, we have developed a confidence that we understand it. But then most of the time, so I only had 9 pro MMA fights, and a dozen other fights, full contact fights, maybe 20 if you include like tournament, maybe 30 or 40 actually if you include like full contact fighting tournaments, where I'd have 3 or 4 fights a day as a teenager and when I was young, and then 9 pro MMA fights. That's so little experience, and it was against pretty low level in opponents in many cases. I fought some good people, but I also fought some lower level opponents. And so it's very limited experience, but it is sure hell. Almost nobody has ever had a first fight, amateur or pro, and came out of there and said, yeah, it's pretty much exactly what I was expecting. Like, near 100% of them say, oh my God, that is nothing like anyone thinks it would be. And in fact, the longer you bring in information unrelated to the experience, often the further you get from understanding it. Now, if you sparred a lot, you'd have a particular understanding. If you had one MMA fight, you'd have a particular understanding. If you had only 8 or 9, you'd have a little. If you had 20 at a low level, you might have some. If you fought once in the UFC, that's going to be more. Jon Jones really, or George St. Pierre, or Anderson Silva, or these people have many fights. There was so much more that they could know if they were able to stay young and have another 100 fights, right? Like knowledge and experience, they're so related. So all of a sudden, we're talking about, never mind, our belief systems. That's kind of rooted in what do we think we know about something? What do you think you know about, the red party or the blue party? Where'd you get that? It's a belief system. How did you develop it? And you're in the most trouble if you believe you know about jiu-jitsu, but actually, don't know about jiu-jitsu. If then you get put in jiu-jitsu, you're like, oh my God, I didn't know anything about that. You get dropped in politics, you're like, oh, this is nothing like I thought. Most everything works that way. And to become an expert in something without actually partaking in it, you can expert yourself down the road so far that you're actually even further from reality. And then limitations due to bias. We'll do a whole live stream on bias sometime. And bias is human. To be biased is to be human. So we believe certain things. We try to reinforce certain things. That's why, actually, as soon as somebody makes a fight prediction or a prediction on a political outcome or a football outcome or a business result or like an entrepreneur speech, whatever it is, you start to develop an immediate bias, looking for things that will reinforce that. So in the end, a lot of times when we end up saying, and I still do this, I still do, fight breakdowns in different environments. And some of my job is that somebody will say, can you tell me what's going to happen between the two members of our karate combat main event? Now, I have the good fortune of, by proving, that my own way of doing it has some value to some audience, and having the support of the president and many of the chairmen and people like Karate Combat, I can go out and say a poem about it, right? Or I can go out and use an analogy to the mist on water or whatever. So I get to do it in many different ways. And, with most of my partners, I can now do that when I understand, to do it in this way where it becomes this sort of performative ritual where it's just like, this guy's this, but this guy's this. And, I remember when I would first start doing this, maybe 2018, 2019, I was having that dissonance, that stress where I was just like, what I'm doing here actually feels like it's a ritual. And it's a ritual developed for the purpose of selling a product on television. Nobody did it on purpose. Nobody was trying to trick anybody, but we're all just doing it because this sort of works for the corporate teat. I don't know why I said teat, but this is why, I'm just going through the motions. And then when I started doing it in all these different ways, exploring all these different ways, which the purpose of them was to get to this point. And then the purpose of this is to get to a point, if I'm lucky to be here 10 years later, that I still see it differently, do it differently, have developed a different way to do it. This is what it is for any of us here that want to create anything. It's the goal isn't to get my turn to say knockout power in both hands, striker versus grappler in a stylistic matchup, winner gets a title shot. Like my dream was never to get my turn to say that. My dream was to be able to, go further as a artist or interpreter or someone who shares stories or somebody who loves martial arts. That was the goal. So suddenly you're like, and people literally, why are you doing this? And now again, back then it was different. Like now my YouTube channel, I don't need it to make any money. When it makes money, I just pass it on to staff or people who somebody wants to make cut downs of this and they're really good. I can pass it on to them. This exists for me to be able to experiment and explore. Back then it was a little dicier because my business was building. But even then I knew I had to stick with exploring it in different ways. But people would be literally and they meant it, and they didn't see. We're all different, right? They in no way saw what I saw, which is not right. It's just my way. That doing that was death. But they would literally say, why don't you just say, give each one a ranking in, wrestling, boxing, jujitsu, and then make a prediction like everybody else. And they meant it. I think. I mean, I would get some variation of that lot. They'd say, there's already a way to do this. Why don't you just do it? We find it somehow really disturbing that you want to do it a different way. Now, over time, performative rituals and doing the same thing over and over, we all kind of now realize, oh, that's just what they do on TV. Not nobody, but that's not what you go to YouTube or even newer platforms for to get the same thing that you can get on TV. It doesn't make any sense. TV is old, newer things are new. You get to try new things. But so anyway, so because of all that, it doesn't make any sense anyways, right? Mostly the very best predictor of fighting in the world, sort of ever. My friend Joey Bagels sets and analyzes the lines in Vegas for sporting events. And he had some way to explain it to me, but it was like anyone who's any meaningful amount of meaningful bets on fighting, meaning 1,000 or more bets of real money. He said the most ever you'll get is somebody who's like 53, 54% right. Now, of course, if you're 54% right and you understand betting, you understand how to use odds in your favor, and you're going to be very wealthy. But in the realm of that, people, even when their own thing is on the line, out of 1,000, predictions, the best coaches too. Although Dan Lambert, he's a coach too, but he owns American Top Team. I've worked with him a lot. There were times where he's just like, I'm like 20-2 in the last 22, and he'd be like, oh shit. Now, and Dan's a very smart and cool guy. I love seeing him. Now, when I see him again, I'll be like, where are we at in the last 1,000? And he might break them all. He might be like, I was right 598 times. But for the most part, if you make 1,000 meaningful bets in Vegas, you're wrong 490 times, 480 times. So all of this is fairly nonsensical. It mostly exists because it's really good for business, and things that are really good for business, for Golden Boy or the UFC or Canelo or any of these very large corporations. If it's good for business, it becomes encouraged and the audience starts to bite on it, but it's not real. So we just have fun. Sorry, it took me 36 minutes to get here. Now I only have about the same. But so we just have fun, right? I still analyze moments, but I try to look for lessons in it. I try to see if there's something about human behavior in it. See if there's something fascinating biomechanically in it. But when I do it sort of in the traditional sense these days, and now again, I'm a human being with a gig that loves what he does. And there are times where somebody says, put this suit on and tell me about the main event. Most of the cases now, because I've been around for so long, by the time they hire me, they go, we're hiring the weird guy, but he seems to actually bring something of value. He's good to work with. The audience likes him. And some of the audience hates him, which is also really to our benefit. So let him do his thing. But sometimes they'll reel you in and go, can you just, break down the main event? And of course I'll do that. I'll do it to the best of my ability, taking into account all of these things so that I don't just say cliches. When I say it in a particular way, and at the end, this one's going to be fireworks. When I do that and they say cut, I just feel so disappointed in myself. When I say, and this one's got fight of the night potential written all over it. Like when I just do one of the cliches, this guy's got unbelievable knockout power, but if the other guy can just use the distance management and get his feet moving, get on his bicycle, try to take out that calf for a length of time, we're going to have a brand new title contender. This one's got fight of the night written all over it. Guys, like when I do that, I'm just so disappointed in myself and part of the motivation of actually trying to develop, see if there was layers that were outside of that was around 2017, 2018. There started to be a lot of fighters commentating and analyzing things. And some of them had 1 million followers and had been champions or were incredibly beautiful. And I'm not, Paige Van Zandt and Austin are friends. And I only reference her because she's beautiful. She's also smart and they're really good at what they do. They're great content creators. They're fun people. I only reference her because she's really smart. But somebody was once, I was doing a job maybe 2018, and they were like, we've talked to Paige Van Zandt about commentating it. I didn't know her very much then. And I just remember going, so she's gorgeous. She's got like 1 million followers. She's like fought in the UFC. If I do the same job as her and you hire me, you're dumb, right? Now, if I do a different job than her and I do it uniquely in some kind of way, and I bring something different to it, and you choose to, and I'm probably less expensive than somebody with 2 million followers, or 5 or 10 or whatever she's got across all platforms, then maybe there'll be a logical reason that you'll hire me that is based on you being a smart person. I had to figure that out. I couldn't just be like, if Robin Black and Michael Bisping do the exact same job, do not hire Robin Black. Michael Bisping is charming, and he's a former champion and a former former Ultimate Fighter, and he's cool, and he's got millions of followers. He's got a podcast every week that's going to support your thing. If I'm going to do the same job as him, do not hire me. The only reason it would make sense to ever hire me is if I do a different job than Michael Bisping or Paige Van Zandt. I'm not trying to talk anybody out of hiring me, but if I just say the same things as them and do it in the same way, and it's a mechanical, it's a ritualistic fighting presentation, and I just do the same thing, why on earth would anyone hire me, right? So, and why am I telling you that? Because that's true of you too. If you're watching this, you are not like everybody else. Do not try to be like everybody else. Like I said, this chapter of my life has been about figuring out more and more how to do things my own unique way. And now I understand that I'm not telling you to just go take a dump in the middle of a cage somewhere because it'll get you a lot of views. Don't do that. And don't just be weird. If you're everyone's weird. So be your actual authentic weird, and you'll do better than if you start to figure out how to emulate somebody who's successful, because they're already better at it. The best you could ever become is kind of like them 5 years earlier. So you have to figure out how to do things your own way. So now today we're having fun. So let's get to a couple of these. When I was talking about so there's one I can't really do. So limitations of knowledge, right? Like, I don't know anything about Jesus Christ. I don't know anything about any of his attributes. I don't know what kind of training, I don't know if this is a real historical figure. There are many people believe this is a historical figure. And then there are some that will say that this was not a historical figure. So I'm not sure of that. I don't have enough knowledge around it. And if this was a real historical person, I don't know if he learned Kung Fu. Like, I don't know anything about him. So I can't, this one's not going to work. The other ones, this one's going to work. And Jon Jones versus 2 Demetrious Johnsons. This is sort of my favorite of, by the way, I'm just going to see if we got any other ones quickly. Yeah. So we've got some great comments, some very nice things from people. Thank you so much. Nothing that supersedes Jon Jones versus 2 Demetrious Johnsons. Okay. So big part of this one. And always when you see the thing, you can immediately start diving into it. But a really good way to do it would be to start asking questions, right? Because if you say Jon Jones versus 2 Demetrious Johnsons, I just start making you a presentation. You probably, and I know in streams and televisions and live broadcasts and stuff, there are scenarios under which you have no choice. You just have this, what your boss told you to do, so you have to do. But in your own environment, and if you are ever faced with these things and you have some experience or knowledge or expertise that's related to them, and you have the opportunity to do it, start asking questions. Jon Jones versus 2 Demetrious Johnsons. The biggest question for me on this scenario is how much time did they have to prepare for this, right? So my biggest question is not how did you clone Demetrious Johnson? I'm just going to say some magic, right? Or science. I don't know. My big question is how much time did they have to prepare? Because if you just spring 2 Demetrious Johnsons on Jon Jones, there's going to be a lot of sort of like what happens on this night in this environment. What is sort of the outcome of a few chaotic principles that kind of take place? And the biggest one is, can Jon Jones, so this is if they just suddenly somebody said, you guys are fighting, or like, the 2 Demetrious Johnsons stole Jon Jones's wife or like money or something, and suddenly they're fighting. In that scenario, there's one major question. Can Jon Jones knock out, or in some way incapacitate one of the Demetrius Johnsons. And that's what everything relies on. Because if there's any length of time, if we've got minutes, there's many other questions. What's the environment? Small, big? Bigger the environment, the better for the Demetrius Johnsons, right? So, very, very large room with no weapons in it. 2 Demetrius Johnsons, and it's just been sprung on them. 2 Demetrius Johnsons have a lot of advantages, right? Small environment, and maybe some weapons present. That increases Jon Jones' likelihood of incapacitating, killing, or knocking out, or in some way, taking him out, one of the Demetrius Johnsons. And then Jon Jones can win. Simply put, Jon Jones versus Demetrius Johnson in a fight. Jon Jones is probably going to win that fight, right? Demetrius has strategies, but strategies don't win fights. So a lot of times people go, what's the strategy? What's the strategy? Israel Adesanya is fighting Alex Pereira. What's the strategy? But strategies don't win fights. The implementation of strategies wins fights. And in almost every case, at a very high level, both strategies are correct. So we're going to just take some abstract, very skilled fighter that's not quite as skilled as Adesanya, but there's no ground fighting. We're just going to kickbox guys not as skilled, but really tough. What's his strategy? You're going to push 100% of the time. 100% of good strategists in that scenario are going to say you need to pressure Adesanya and take away his ability to move and just be in better shape than him and just hit him a lot from the closest distance possible. Don't let him get space. Don't let him set up. Don't let him start, tricking you with fake movements and trying to imprint ideas on you. You have to close the distance, smash him up. And Demetrius and Adesanya, every good strategist is going to say, we want to move our feet. We want to hit him at distance. We want to try to imprint other threats on him, make him start to think, and then smash up his leg or jab his eye socket off. And both are correct. So neither strategy is going to win the fight. Whoever is better at doing their particular thing in this particular night on this particular time is going to win. And Jon Jones versus Demetrius Johnson, we know Demetrius is going to run. He's going to try to kick his leg. He's got to stay away from him. He can't let Jon get a hold of him. He can't end up on the bottom. Could he jump up on his neck? There's a lot of things that anyone with a large, cache of martial arts knowledge and experience and some imagination we're going to agree on a lot of these things. But we're also going to agree, and so is Demetrius, when somebody outweighs you by 120 pounds and they're one of the greatest fighters ever, that you're at a major disadvantage. But 2 Demetrius Johnsons for 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 4 minutes, all they have to do is not get killed, and then they are in this game. The bigger the room, and the longer that they both stay conscious, the more they wear Jon Jones down, and we get into minute 4 or 5. Is this 5-minute rounds or is this unlimited rounds? Again, lots of questions. The unlimited rounds, very large room, 2 Demetrius Johnsons. The 2 Demetrius Johnsons, as long as they both stay conscious for a long time, they're going to win that fight eventually, right? And that's really cool. Now, the big variable that I asked, and we don't have an answer because nobody here in this room, when I ask questions, nobody will answer me, is how long did they have to prepare? Because that'll also change every dynamic, because now the 2 Demetrius Johnsons can prepare 14 different strategies with 2 minds, and Jon Jones will prepare a strategy. He will prepare multiple ones. He'll prepare what happens if they split up. How can I work on trying to corral 2 bodies? What can I do to make one at distance and then time when the other one comes in? Because his job is to get one out of there. You got to get one of those Demetrius Johnsons out of there, and the whole thing becomes much simpler, especially sooner, right? So they both start working on that, but the complexity of it changes. And the truth is, space is the thing. If it's in the size of my desk, which is not very big, it's pretty big, it's the length of my arms, both directions, Jon Jones is going to kill. He's going to butcher 2 Demetrius Johnsons. Football field, I got double Johnson. But, well, who the hell knows? Oh my God, it's 4:20. And that's a coincidence. You're watching this some other time. It's 4:20 Eastern time. I'm not a heavy cannabis user, but I noticed that one of my favorite things when I was back doing sort of those traditional fight breakdowns from 2012 on through for 10 years. I did with the rematch of Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz, and I had timed Nate Diaz's out to exactly 420. If you go on YouTube and you Google Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, Robin Black breakdown, you'll find a couple. And there's one from Conor McGregor's standpoint and one from Nate Diaz. And that was actually super fun. When you did it, like, what would it look like if this guy was able to get his winning conditions kind of happening, right? And yeah, it's 420, which was really fun. We're going to do one more, and then I got to go. And I'm sorry, I got to go. I apologize. I'm only doing 2 weird fight breakdowns. I got a whole show of them coming out in a week, but I get to do whatever I want, right? And I'm so thankful you come along for the ride. My wife and daughter are downstairs, which is incredible. Like, when I'm very grateful all the time for what I get to do and how I get to do it. It's like I built this cool studio in a big ass house out by the river, and I get to hang out with my family and just come up here and hang out with you guys. It's so cool. But so Mike Perry versus Kimbo. So first of all, my first question here is, like, where did we get a time machine, right? So because Kimbo Slice passed quite a few years ago, big fan of Kimbo Slice. We would do this in BYB. Mike Perry fights in another one. Kimbo fought in UFC, and he fought in Elite XC. Was that the one that died after he did it? Can't remember. Yeah, it was Elite XC. And he fought in people's backyards. Jorge fought in the same backyards. It's a great matchup. Kimbo was much heavier than Mike, and that's an issue for Mike. Also, when are we going? Like, Kimbo at his prime was really Mike Perry. This I hope he would take this as a compliment. I know that he would. But Mike Perry is like this generation's Kimbo Slice. Like, I know he didn't break YouTube wide open, and I know he wasn't the most viral, street fighting sensation. But when it comes to just winning with will and desire, and I know he lost to Jake Paul in a boxing match, and that's part of life. Kimbo lost. But Mike Perry at his best, when Mike Perry is full of fire and mentally prepared and on his game, his greatest win for me is Michael Page. And I mean this with all the love in the world, but he has no business beating Michael Page when it comes just to skill for skill. Michael Page doesn't even get touched by people of Mike Perry's skill level, which is very high. Mike Perry has a very high skill level, incredibly high. But that level of high, Michael Page, he's able to move his feet in ways to just avoid. And now you only got 2 weapons, right? And yet, Mike was able to start to understand him, be in as good or better shape than him, put mental pressure on him, end up coming back to tie it. And when you are tied with Mike Perry going to an extra round, you're dead. I don't care who you are. You're dead. Like, Mike Perry in a tied fight with an extra round, come on. That's all about desire and will. Of course, it's still skill, and of course it's still, but that when we talk about will and desire, and Kimbo was the same. By the time Kimbo lost on the streets, he was worn out. He was worn down physically, and he couldn't do it anymore. And desire just supersedes fatigue in many cases. Real desire, that's true will. This David Goggins stuff where it's like his feet don't work anymore, and then he runs another 50 kilometers or whatever. That kind of thing. That's in most of us, I believe. It's in us. But it's partly trained, and it's the more you do it, the more you can do it. And that's proven by these people. Most of us we get our best night, and we can do our best day, our best fight, our best challenge, our best, and we can go a little further than we thought. That makes it more possible next time. Sometimes we let ourselves down. You gotta digest that too. You gotta feel that. You gotta live with that. You let yourself down. You were not as strong as you thought. You didn't run into the house and save the old lady, or pick the car up, or climb up the thing to get the cat out. Whatever it is, we all think we'll be that person, but some days we're not. And especially if we're not mentally prepared or physically prepared, or experiencing, there's a primitive area of the brain, and then there's like a highly evolved area of the brain, and it's called limbic transfer, when you kind of move into the primitive panicky area of the brain, and you panic and you have to get out of there. If you have a minute, your coach can, even though you're begging him to take you out, he could calm you and bring you back into the present part of the brain where you're capable of it. But in that moment to panic, often that's it. And many of us have experienced that in different times of our lives. You use that as part of the learning process, and it can be built. It can be built. Mike Perry, and Kimbo, a lot of what in Kimbo's case he was, and Mike Perry's case he is. A lot of it is trained through just overcoming oneself, but a lot of it was built in your childhood too, which now we'll look and go, well, lucky Kimbo, he has this. Well, went through some really hard things to get that at real fragile times, right? These are all parts of life. But I'd love to see that fight. I'd love to see it over in BYB. Again, that's a show I'm going to be sharing some more stuff about, because it's very unique. Unique's my thing these days. Same old is not for me. You'll watch the big fights, especially the last 2 or 3. You can't get me to watch, and it's not because I'm watching hundreds of fights a week still, but I can't turn on the big corporate undercard anymore. I just can't do it. I can't be yelled at by the people about the same old stuff about what this contender is gonna. They're just people. What fascinating fighters that are in all different organizations, and there's some in the big corporate undercards, and you've got to watch those guys, or and then there are some on the non-big corporate shows, and there's some all over the world. There's some in different leagues. So I'm watching the individuals. Which is what happens when you turn off the corporate broadcast, which is telling you what to believe. You start looking at your own things. If you're not being indoctrinated with like corporate messaging about what to buy and what's the best, and suddenly you increase your knowledge and your experience, suddenly you can see some really great things all over the place. But I must go. I've gone longer than I promised my wife and my daughter that I would. But it's this Thursday coming up. I will not be doing a live stream. I'll be fight coordinating on a shoot. I'll be able to tell you about that in a couple of months. Super exciting stuff. I've been working on it for a year, and probably in the next few months I'll be able to tell you. And then I'm flying to Singapore for karate combat. We never got to, but it's going to carry it over to next time. We never got to love karate combat. It's just such a pleasure. We never got to what would happen, George St. Pierre versus Wonder Boy in karate combat. And typically you go, well, George St. Pierre in his prime or Wonder Boy. These guys are both in their early 40s, I think, right around 40. So right now, but they're friends, and they've trained a lot, and they've learned a lot from each other. And we'll talk about it another time. Karate combat's awesome. Next week, depending on when you're watching this, karate combat from Singapore. Super jazzed about that. We'll do lots of stuff on my social content. I got a few hundred people on with me right now across all different platforms. Thanks for joining me. If you're so inclined, I do like a good vibes kind of positive newsletter or something, a blast every few days. It goes to your email, and I will never charge for it. I'll never ask anything for it. It's just something I really love to do, and I'm going to do till the day I die, I think, a couple times a week, maybe. I call it daily-ish, but it's probably only a few times a week now. So maybe I'll change the title, but it's in my Instagram, in the link in my bio. And I send that out every day, and I really like it. It feels like something. Please, subscribe and stuff, and lots of love. I will be back. I think I'll have a new YouTube up on next Tuesday. They come up most Tuesday mornings, early morning. I got some fun stuff coming up soon, and I'm really grateful for you guys for hanging out with me. Lots of love. Till next time, enjoy the hostilities, my friends.